Well, I think we're going to start, if you don't mind. It's a couple minutes after noon, and this is a window between our morning classes and our afternoon classes. And I know people often trickle in, but since I'm the least important part of this scenario, I think I'll start introducing Vince, and this will give time for him to have his full 45 minutes of opportunity to speak with you. I'm Carrie Morgan. I'm the gallery director here at MCAD. I know most of you know me, but I have the pleasure of helping coordinate our sabbatical presentations for our faculty who have the opportunity to spend a year, sometimes a semester, sometimes a full year away from MCAD, hopefully doing things they have wanted to do for a long time and not had really the leisure of pursuing their own creative pursuits and intelligences. Mostly, you probably know, our faculty are incredibly dedicated, and they have a high teaching load as well as expectations of a lot of committee work. And I think sabbaticals are incredibly important for our faculty, and this is an opportunity for them to share with you what they've been able to do. And in addition, there is an opportunity for our faculty who are on sabbatical to be part of a group show that we will have this coming spring. It opens on the 17th of January and will be on view for 3 weeks in our concourse gallery on the second floor. So some of the work that Vince and Ruth and our other faculty might be talking about this fall. Hopefully you'll get to see some of that on display in the spring. This also gives them a format for an opportunity for going deeper and giving you more information than what you might see in that show. But very quickly, I'll give you a background that Vince helped prepare about himself. So Vince Leo is professor of art at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design, where he teaches in both the media arts and the liberal arts programs. He was born in Columbus, Ohio, and there he received his BA, a Bachelor of Arts in English, as well as a master's degree in photographic studies at Ohio State University. His work has been published in magazines such as Art Forum, Frieze, Parquet, and Art Papers, R.I.P., rest in peace, and most recently, the Little Brown Mushroom blog. Vince's artist books are in the collections of the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, the Art Institute of Chicago, and the Walker Art Center. In addition to his work in publications, he has also exhibited photographic work internationally, most recently at the Weissman Museum of Art. He's received fellowships from the Bush Foundation, the McKnight Foundation, the Jerome Foundation, the Minnesota State Arts Board, and the Ohio State Arts Board. You can read and view his work at the website vinceleo.virb.com. And as a personal plug, I have to say that Vince was my supervisor the first couple years I came to MCAD, and he was fabulous, and I really appreciate all that I know he does to support staff and students and his colleagues here. So thank you, Vince.
Thank you. Thank you, Carrie. That was very generous, even if I did write it myself. First of all, I'd like to thank all of you for coming today. I'm truly privileged to be here. Many thanks to MCAD for the unbelievable, fantastic, once-in-a-lifetime experience of a sabbatical. It reminded me of what my grandmother said at the age of 90 when a bolt of lightning hit her house and literally threw her out of her bed. I didn't think anything new could happen to me, she said. But it did. My overall personal goal for the year was to reintegrate art into every facet of my life. And to some extent, that actually happened. Thanks again, MCAD. I'd also like to thank Catherine Turchon for one of her photographs, and for everything, and I do mean everything else. A very special thanks to Susan P. Kalmanson. This is one of my favorite brainstorming sessions at MCAD. Oops. Unfortunately, it's also a near-perfect analog for what my brain feels like to me most days. The sabbatical was no different. Emmanuel Levinas in the morning, Photoshop in the afternoon, filing after lunch, followed by HTML the next morning, etc. Like most of my life, I couldn't recognize much of a narrative in my sabbatical year. Instead, it felt more like a series of insights, discoveries, and dead ends that made sense at the time, but not so much now. So in the spirit of my somewhat discontinuous practice, this talk will not be a story. It will be a montage of various thoughts, reviews, notes, and images. Hopefully, the sum will add up to more than the total of its disparate parts. I'm in a strange room in a strange city with a strange camera. I'm thinking I can photograph God with this camera, and that no one has ever photographed God before. I think it's going to be a long exposure. So I put the camera on a table, point it out a window, and set the self-timer. There is an envelope on the windowsill with my name on it, and when I open it, I find a $20 bill with a note in my father's handwriting, which reads, "Buy some film on me, love, Dad." I burst into tears and weep uncontrollably out of love for my parents and my own shortcomings. My tears fall on the camera and tabletop, and as they do, each teardrop turns to pure silver. I realize they're actually forming a photographic negative, but I can't make out the image through the tears, and I can't stop crying. This is the story of how Anna came to America. It was 1920, and she was an old maid at 21, living with her parents in Italy when her brother found an eligible bachelor willing to marry her in the States. She wanted to come, but her mother, to whom she was very close, didn't want her to leave. One son was dead in World War I, and the other was overseas already. My grandmother was in agony over her decision. One late afternoon, she was walking home through the fields by herself. Suddenly, a bright light appeared, and as she came closer, she realized it was Jesus himself standing in the wheat. In tears, she asked, "Jesus, what should I do?" Jesus replied, "Follow your heart." The next day, she started the walk to Naples. I heard this story hundreds of times as a boy. It was the creation myth of my family and the most profound description of my boyhood reality, a space in which the miraculous and the mundane were evenly distributed. After my daughter Grace was born, my grandmother suddenly changed the story. Instead of follow your heart, Jesus said, "Go to America, but know that you will suffer just like I did on the cross." I couldn't help thinking this basically proved my grandmother was making it all up, that she had never seen Jesus in the first place. How could you just change stories? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something else was going on. My grandmother's stories weren't factual histories. They were never meant to be written down. They were the embodiment of her culture, not mine. An oral culture, not a textual one. In oral culture, stories change as circumstances warrant, naturally and without qualification or notation. My grandmother's stories were what J.D. Crossan would call parabolic histories, lives recounted and even remembered as a series of parables, metaphors with moral lessons. At a certain point, I understood that as a boy and young man, my grandmother had wanted me to understand the miraculous properties of the world and to be bold and passionate in my decisions. Once I became a father, her message was to persevere, to fight through the pain, to hold true to my path no matter what. I began to realize that the stories were not only stories, but compassionate acts of imagination, a way of teaching in the form of gifts from my grandmother to me. My grandmother was born a peasant who couldn't read or write in any language, but she was destined to become an assimilationist, a self negotiated by otherness and reinvention, a way of being in which destiny itself was understood as an act of representation. As part of my sabbatical proposal, I was to build a website that would serve as an archive of my work, both as a writer and photographer. Up to now, this archive had been in total disarray, and I felt that being able to collect everything in one place would be the first step to understanding what I'd been up to for the past 40 years. The first thing I realized after spending 10 solid weeks learning HTML and CSS was that even though I was now capable of coding my own simple website, there was simply no way I was going to take the time necessary to code, link, and design an online archive of my work that would need to be at least 200 discrete pages. Not going to happen. So I looked for the next best thing, a template that would allow me to make the kind of site I had imagined with a lot less work. I settled on verb.com and took the next 2 months scanning, preparing, revising, and uploading work. I was very happy with the results. I wasn't looking for bells and whistles, just an easily understood navigation system that would allow visitors to understand my practice in its various forms instead of linking me to a single body of work. Unfortunately, I decided to enable Google Analytics for the site. The first day I went to my now completed website, the fruit of nearly 40 years of work, I discovered that I had 0 visitors. Not a single person. Same thing the next day. Next day, I emailed Susan Kalmanson the URL and had a whopping 1 visitor. Given the millions of unique hits to YouTube videos of babies watching TV, I felt like a total washout. Whatever the opposite of viral was, that would be me. This is how I came to understand that having a website was just like being in high school. It was all about popularity. But instead of how many parties you were invited to, it was about how many visitors, how many unique page visits, how many referring sites. The truth of the matter was that my website was beginning to look exactly like my high school experience, unpopular. But any mention of popularity would be incomplete without noting my 8th grade teacher, Sister Jean Baptist, who declared, "Becoming a saint isn't a popularity contest." Parenthesis, she also pounded my desk with a 3-foot-long paddle and accused me of being a heretic. End parenthesis. So now I was feeling the double whammy. A complete outsider and guilty for wanting to be an insider. This was not just like being in high school, it was a near-perfect analog for being in a Roman Catholic high school. To my credit, I would say that I never stopped checking Google Analytics. And slowly but surely, over the course of several weeks, a few visitors would stop by and look around. Then a few more. Some days 2, some days 5. A crazy day when I was linked in Little Brown Mushroom, over 40. After a few months, it dawned on me that my website wasn't about a supersized viral monstrosity. It was a place where I felt as vulnerable and hungry as I ever did as a teenager, but also a space of sharing in which I could open my practice, to anyone who might be interested, something I think even Sister Jean Baptist could get behind. I still look every day. I still smile at the anonymous person who found me through Facebook or a random Google search. My website doesn't feel like high school anymore. It feels like a new me beyond my own control, reinvented by every random interaction, part of something I can't even explain. It's been 10 years since the second U.S. invasion of Iraq and 12 years of American casualties in Afghanistan. Everyone is exhausted. Big media can't seem to find a story. Until Iran becomes the next Iraq, no war news seems to be good war news. Unfortunately, the deaths continue despite the news cycle. 16 American dead in Afghanistan in March alone. You might not be surprised by this fact if you watch CNN 24/7, but you know it in the pit of your stomach if you tuned in to the PBS NewsHour every night. That's because starting on March 31st, 2003, 11 days after the war in Iraq began, the NewsHour has been broadcasting a short list of servicemen and women who have died in the conflict as they become available from the Department of Defense. The casualties appear in 2s or 5s or 10s every night for a week, sometimes 2 nights per week, week after week, month after month, year after year. Titled Honor Roll, this segment expanded in 2006 to include soldiers killed in Afghanistan, where they are still dying and still appearing in the NewsHour's final segment. The format is deceptively simple. Each soldier is represented for a few seconds on screen by a photograph along with his, her age, service branch, rank, and hometown. One soldier after another for as long as it takes. The entire segment runs in complete silence. Even though there's a silly background illustration of flag, soldiers, and desert, the reportage could hardly be more direct or objective. There is no comment, no break in the solemn procession of dead, no action to relieve the sense of loss. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the NewsHour has used its nightly schedule to create one of the most innovative and powerful instruments of wartime reporting since 16mm cameras brought Vietnam to the nightly news. Our life together is a big blue circle. Inside the circle are all the people we love and support together. Students, colleagues, friends, family, and all the people we touch through them. At the center of this big blue circle is a spiral, which is the mystery of our love for each other. It's one of the wheels of the universe turning with grace, creativity, and regard. Sometimes you are the spiral, sometimes I am the spiral, and sometimes we both are the spiral. At the far edge of the circle is a black box, which is all the tribulations we encounter in this life, whether from friends and family or each other. Between the box and the spiral is an orange line, which guarantees that no matter what happens in the big blue circle, and no matter the trials and tears in the box, we are always connected to the mystery spiral at the center of the spinning universe. Your heart and my heart. Happy birthday. Dear Rick, thanks for the New York Times article on MOOCs, Massive Open Online Courses. I've been following their development closely in the Chronicle of Higher Education, whose coverage has been terrific. Next step is to actually sign up. I have to admit, taking 2 online courses this summer with James Johnson, thank you, James, was a real eye-opener. I actually learned a lot and never spoke to James one-on-one. What James didn't prepare himself could be cribbed from Linda or YouTube. There are actually so many videos, the biggest problem became which particular video would be best. At last count, there were 4 complete Photoshop for Photographers courses on Linda, each one over 10 hours long, each with its own instructor. I found that I could learn some very complicated parts of HTML and Photoshop through online videos with an accompanying text. But a funny thing happened in the midst of this learning process. I missed people. I missed being in the same room with people. It made me think long and hard about what might remain unique to MCAD in the face of an onslaught of disruptive technologies. Although skill acquisition and competencies are crucial to our students' development, they don't really add up to the self-critical, self-motivated, creative individuals that graduate the college. In my mind, digital delivery systems can do a lot of things, but none of them can take the place of an MCAD critique. Critique isn't a quantifiable competency so much as a dynamic environment that privileges the social context and content of learning. Most neurologists will tell us that people learn more deeply as more areas of the brain are engaged in the learning process. And nothing gets neurons firing quite like face-to-face contact. During critique, students and faculty have to listen, look, respond, change. Social development and creative development move arm in arm. We learned how to make things and how to talk about what we make and how to make them better. More importantly, we provide our students a way to look at their work through the eyes of another human being, a crucial understanding in the life of any creative person. There's only one way to get there, and that's through the mutually agreed upon social structure of the crit. Yes, critique is something we have in common with all art schools, but maybe more to the point, it's what we have in common with Socrates. Learning as discussion, learning as discursive engagement, learning as a form of human association. But critique isn't just a special learning tool. It's also the most vital embodiment of the social contract we hold with each of our students, past and future. The underlying experience that shapes MCAD as a particular kind of community. Don't we have a lunch date coming up? Your treat, dude. Dear Mr. President, I want to start by saying thank you. In my letter of November 15th, 2012, I asked that you cross party lines regarding Social Security and Medicare on your next proposed budget, and you have done that. Unlike Maureen Dowd, I think you did your best on gun control as well. It's a tough time to get things done. Let's hope for the best on immigration reform. That said, I'd like to return to the second part of my November letter, which was about the cost issues surrounding higher education. As noted in that letter, I'm happy that your administration has put policies in place that provide some relief to college graduates with academic debt. Unfortunately, it's not enough. That combined $1 trillion of debt is not only weighing on an entire generation of college graduates, it's a tremendous drag on the economy. Rather than spending their wages on goods and services, a huge group of our citizens is mailing their money off to Fannie Mae every month. Fortunately, I think something can be done. Think of it as a jubilee, days on which Jewish kings periodically forgave all debt. I realize you're not a king, but you don't have to forgive every penny of debt. All you need to do is forgive 50% of student debt accruing from federal student loans. According to the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, this would amount to almost $430 billion. This money would immediately find its way into the economy, something like a mini stimulus package, not only to those struggling with student debt, but for the entire country. It's not the answer, but it's a step toward freedom, and every step counts, with all due respect. It's not the first time photographs of casualties have been used to make a point about the nature of war. After reviewing the photographs Alexander Gardner had made at the Battle of Antietam, Matthew Brady decided to exhibit 21 large views of piles of corpses in his New York gallery with the simple title, The Dead of Antietam. Life magazine famously published The Faces of the Dead in Vietnam, 1 week's toll, consisting of 242 small portraits in the June 27, 1969 issue. Both Brady's exhibition and the Life article were unabashed attempts to shock their audiences through sheer numbers. To its credit, Honor Roll forgoes the sensationalism of large casualty counts for the dull, ongoing ache of duration. Although the NewsHour couldn't have known when the first segment aired, Honor Roll has evolved into the clearest depiction of what is most crucial about America's current wars, their length. The continuous procession of fallen young men and women, now in its 11th year, signifies more deeply than any expert talking head what a long war actually means. The seemingly endless loss of life after life, day after day, month after month, year after year, in ongoing military operations that have no clear ending and no objective criteria of success. Forget the fantasies of liberation peddled by our duly elected representatives, and the scripts of positive change repeated ad infinitum by the generals. Honor Roll isn't another war story. It's a day-in, day-out description of military occupation. But in the grind of occupation, even the war talk talking heads have disappeared, compounding the sense of alienation and waste. There's something monstrously incongruous about watching 57 minutes of chatter about the Republican Party's difficulties with Hispanic voters, the temperament of Washington, and the effect of sequestration on employment, only to be confronted with 3 final minutes of silent death. But that is who we have become. Chatter and death week after week. Chatter and death month after month. Chatter and death year after year. In its own indirect fashion, Honor Roll goes about the dirty representational work of recreating the current national character of the land of the free and the home of the brave. I'm in the 20th Century Restaurant with my mom and dad and sister Anna. I'm 6 years old, and we've come here for breakfast after church. My dad and I are in sports coats and ties, and my mom and sister are in full-skirted dresses. I'm having cinnamon toast and hot chocolate like I do every Sunday. Suddenly, I see a man enter the restaurant. He's kind of shabby, wearing an overcoat with a camera around his neck. I realize this is Robert Frank. Then I realize it's actually 1955, and he's making the photographs that would become the Americans. I'm excited to watch, to see Robert Frank work, to see if he'll photograph my family. He's very quiet and very quick and begins photographing immediately. But every time he makes a photograph, someone in the restaurant disappears, or two people, or even three. It's like magic. No one but me even seems to notice. Finally, he's at the table with me and my family, and I realize that they are going to disappear too. I say, wait a minute. I know who you are. You can't really do this. But he does. He doesn't stop until we are the last two people in the room. He looks at me, and I notice his camera is at shoulder level. His finger is on the shutter button. Then he says, every act of representation changes the world forever. I realize this is the title of a sequence of photographs I will exhibit in a show called Lucky. That exhibition is still 45 years in my future. But I reply, I wrote that. Robert Frank says, I know. Then he smiles and presses the shutter button. The last photographs in Robert Frank's autobiographical Lines of My Hand are of a bay in Nova Scotia accompanied by the words, "Isn't it wonderful just to be alive?" Nova Scotia has remained one of Robert Frank's most important photographic subjects ever since. Combining the rough immediacy of Polaroid with a willingness to dissemble the integrity of individual frames, Robert Frank created a new photographic language for himself based on autobiography and mediated by land and sea. Photographed 20 years after Lines of My Hand and published 16 years after it had been photographed, Pagnurtung is comprised of 27 Polaroids made on a trip to an Inuit town on Baffin Island. The book is laid out as a simple travelogue, complete with captions. Pagnurtung Harbor, approach to Pagnurtung Airport, community meeting place, community oil storage on left. But the captions don't explain the utter desolation of the place. Why Robert Frank photographed so many stones, so many grave markers, why there are no people in any of the photographs. The questions find their way to the final photograph of the book. A road dead-ending into the ocean, complete with stones and grave markers. Captioned, End of the Pagnurtung Roads System. It brings the travel narrative to an abrupt conclusion, as if the entire trip were a one-way pilgrimage to this single spot. This is where the road ends, where fossil fuel culture ends, where everything ends. This is where Robert Frank sees the shapes of his own mortality and refuses to look away. This is where the prosaic description of travelogue and the expanded awareness of metaphor suddenly occupy the same space without either becoming the other. As the conflagration of endings in the last photograph twists itself back up the sequence, the travel narrative becomes a tightly edited story of human progress. Pre-human world of sea and cloud moves to primitive piles of stones, community dwellings, individual homes, oil storage, cemeteries. The injustices visited upon the Inuit becomes a figure for every manner of exploitation. And then, once again, there is the end. This time, the end of humanity, the rise and fall of civilization in 27 photographs. But there is a third story in Pagnurtung. In this version, the world has already ended. There is only one human being left alive, and it is Robert Frank. He makes a record of what remains of a world without humans, a world in which stones have regained their rightful place in creation. The apocalypse, according to Robert Frank, has no aliens, no earthquakes, no fire or ice, just gray silence, a place of eternal solitude that has somehow found balance and peace again. It's a vision in which the sin against First Peoples is memorialized and the idea of human progress mourned. But it is also the vision of one man looking beyond the present into a future that his own desire has made inescapable. A vision in which the trajectory of being and the moment of awareness have left a single trace. The end times have never seemed so seductive. In many ways, they look a lot like that view made 36 years earlier of a bay in Nova Scotia, a view that promised a new and more joyful life. One of the great joys of my sabbatical year was taking long walks with my neighbor, David Goldies. One day while out on a walk, I photographed a stone, and David said, "Does the world really need another photograph of a stone?" He meant it as an observation rather than a judgment, but the seed of doubt had been sown. I had been photographing stones for several months, and now with a single question, I went from ongoing optimism to rock-bottom anxiety. Why did the world need another picture of a stone? I thought about it for days and sleepless nights. I stopped making photographs of stones. I racked my brain for a reason to make the photographs I was seeing, a way that their documentation might bring about something positive in the world. It seemed that my entire way forward rested on the answer to that single question, which had become something of a riddle. The solution came one very cold afternoon on a solitary walk in which I found myself noticing stone after stone. No matter what I reasoned, no matter what I thought, the stones kept popping out of the background, forcing me to note a quirky utility or a variegated surface. The answer was simple. The world did not need another photograph of a stone. There was no utilitarian function to be satisfied by representing stones. There was no purpose at all. There was only the joy I found in their presence and the meaning I understood in their silence. In that moment of purposelessness, there were no thoughts of prints, file sizes melted away, exhibitions plans vanished, questions disappeared. In that moment, there was only me and the mysterious and somewhat unexplainable intentionality of my attention. As a matter of fact, in that moment, I couldn't explain anything. So I made a photograph of a stone, and then another, and then another. The feeling of freedom was overwhelming. For the first time in what seemed like an eternity, I had no one to answer to, no expectations to meet, no purpose to fulfill. I plainly and simply followed my curiosity, the pleasures of the visual field, and my feet. Making photographs of stones became an almost effortless daily ritual. I didn't make 10 photographs every day. I made 50 or more. I didn't think. I simply noticed and composed. It was like being in a photographic state of grace, in which I didn't earn the pictures, they were given to me, dozens at a time, every day. Nothing else mattered except remaining in that state of grace as long as possible. Later, I discovered geotagging, and later still mapping functions, and later still how to upload my photographs to the Google Earth environment. The entire body of work was installed in the faculty show as an example of my research. But in the end, it wasn't about research or technology or even imagination. In the end, Prospect Park stones was about a friendship, a long walk, and a simple question. Thank you, David. Honor roll isn't easy. It takes determination to stay with the whole program and watch in silence as 5 or 8 or 12 more young men and women scroll across your screen. And to complete the NewsHour's representational proposition, you have to do this night after night after night. The 10-plus year investment in time and effort is a testament to the NewsHour's discipline and high regard for its viewers. It's also devastating. One night doesn't seem so bad, but then you remember the night before, and then the week before, and then the month before, and then the year before. The cumulative effect feels like an almost unendurable loss. And in the midst of that unendurable loss, you can't help but realize that there will be another night and another week and another month and another year at least to come. Facing that knowledge is enough to make you want to stop thinking about anything, but especially about the vast numbers of Iraqi casualties, the dead children, the drones. The only thing left to do is to commit to watching another night, to honor the sacrifice another week, to mourn the wounded families another month, to refuse to turn the channel for as many years as it takes. Around and through, and in spite of the nightly sorrow, there's poetry in the photographs. Mostly official service portraits with a few snapshots. The photographs in honor roll reveal young men and women facing the camera willingly, aware that a photograph was in progress, actively shaping the formation of the image. These are not selves captured, but selves imagined, selves committed to, selves feared for, selves forged through sacrifice and desire. In almost every case, the photographer has respected that imagined self, committing it to posterity without undue ostentation or artifice. There is in the social nature of this photographic engagement both trust and humility. Trust on the part of the sitters and humility on the part of the photographers. Working together through the simplest of photographs appearing at the very end of the nightly news, they remind us that human social relations can in fact be governed by mutual respect and dignity. It's the slimmest glimmer of hope, snatched from a media spectacle both vast and depressing. But in my mind, that glimmer endures. Resisting the chatter and death, denying the chatter and death, defining our loss not as body counts, but as an ever-expanding communion of souls, haunting our living rooms and our future, repeating in a single voice, night after night, month after month, year after year. War is over. Thank you. Boy, do I feel better. I'm happy to answer any questions or entertain comments or whatever.
Question, please. It seems like writing is a very important part of your practice.
It is.
And it's especially unique to me because I'm not necessarily a writer. So what comes first for you when do you write and then photograph and find the state of grace, or do you find the state of grace and then you write, or is it not as orderly as that?
Well, finding that state of grace is like great thing to do, whether you're writing or whether you're making photographs. The difference for me is that when I write, that state of grace is like I contact it through a very interior mechanism. I just like grind the gears until something eventually just happens. With photographs, it's a little different because you're always with me anyway, I'm always negotiating the world. And so, it's a little bit more difficult and it's just a different thing. That makes sense?
It does. It seems like parallel and separate practices.
They have some communication. They really do. But it's happening at a point that I'm not totally aware of. I see it at certain points, but it's usually long after I've been there.
A few thoughts. I wonder if there's a way of encapsulating this presentation as a PDF that I could download.
I have no idea what that might be.
Well, we'd have to see all the text that you were reading, or better yet, have you read it.
I do have an audio recording. Todd is very graciously recording this. So maybe there's a QuickTime movie, which might be the easiest way to do it.
The other request would be that you're...
I'm very wary of your request, David. I think I made that perfectly clear.
Your comments about the importance of a critique were really revelatory, and I wondered if we can put that in some catalog of MCAD somewhere.
Anything's possible. Eric?
Well, following up David's idea, this seems like somewhere between the European kind of almost an intellectual genre, the essay film, which is rarely done in the United States. We like our films pure and simple. But this feels like somewhere between performance art and an essay film. Performance, because you did it live today, but as a QuickTime,
Right.
It could be a really beautiful essay film. It's very personal.
Yeah, it's really funny that you would say European model, because I first started working this way with short texts and slides because I'd been asked I for some reason was doing a lot of talks in Germany in the mid 80s. And so everything had to be translated. So I devised a system where you'd read for 2 minutes and the translation would be for 2 minutes. You read for 2 minutes, the translation would be for 2 minutes. And it worked really, really, really well. I used it for a long time, and then I stopped using it. And I saw Laurie Anderson during my sabbatical year, and she reminded me of this, this format that I'd used a while ago. And it was like, oh, great. Now I know how I'm going to do my sabbatical talk. Tom?
Vince, I really appreciated the beginning of your talk and discussion of your grandmother and the oral tradition that you acknowledged in relation to the textual. This goes back a little bit to Catherine's comment, and I'm wondering if for you photography doesn't represent a kind of homage to an oral tradition of storytelling in a way, versus the textual, the more written down, the less, I guess we could say, slightly less ephemeral?
I don't know. I think the thing that I've come to understand so much about that oral culture through my grandmother is it was never fixed. I think if you wanted to come up with a weird analog for oral culture, it would be somewhere on the horizon of digital media, where it's like, there never seems to be a fixed point. Photographs to me tend to stay pretty solid. But I think that the fact is that photographs actually in the end allowed me to contact that culture that had remained somewhat hidden to me until I started addressing it with a camera. Yeah, that's what opened up the culture to me.
And the two photographs of her, I think there were two, where they did take both of them?
Yep. Yeah.
I'm Barbara Walbert. I'm a visitor here, and
I'm flattered.
I was a visiting professor to the U before.
Oh, uh-huh.
I would like to ask you about the stone story again. When you said after you gave yourself permission to take the photographs of the stones again, then you talked about the state of grace, and you were enjoying that you could do that. And at first it seemed to me as if you're seeing the stone and you just do practically almost nothing, you're just taking this picture. And the stone is doing everything, like they popped up,
Yeah.
as you said. But I'm wondering, because you continued taking photographs, if you then, or how is this process of becoming suddenly more of a creator, being the activity,
Yeah.
and then on your side,
No, I see what
I
you
think
mean.
this stone with this other
Yeah.
one or that, you know, it would be better to even take away this little branch here or
Sure.
something like that.
Sure.
Can you speak about that?
Yes. I pretty much continue to do this. You know, you kind of build up a log of what's been done. But I've developed a little trick, which is I stop doing it for 2 months, and then I forget everything. And so when I go out, I'm feeling fresh again. You know, it's you know, when I say state of grace, that might have been an exaggeration. But I think that for me, the point is that I was able to disengage my activities from some real purpose, and that remains. You know, I don't. My purpose hasn't become, okay, I need to get to 200 photographs, or okay, now my purpose is I have to get to here. I have to do this. There's still, for me, these are kind of just photographs, and I know that's kind of weird to say, but I don't expect them to do any real work in the world. It might be imaginative work. It might be, it might, you know, call your attention to stones that you might notice. Yeah. Karen?
Building off of what you just said about purpose and given your background and your deep respect for higher education, have you also drafted a letter to President Obama talking about this new impetus that everything has to be measured, and that the front page news about Carleton College, you know, like that there's this system for which to say, you go to this school, this is your purpose, your life will be this way. I'm just wondering, I mean, I think this is an issue for everybody who's concerned in this.
You know, I think one of the great joys of being a private citizen again is that I don't have to kind of think about this in a nuts and bolts way. You know, do I think it's kind of ridiculous to measure job placement when the economy is running at, you know, 7.9% unemployment and people under the age of 30 are up to 15% unemployment? Yeah, I think it's ridiculous. But you know what? Is it ever going to really, truly happen? I don't know. You know, I mean, I've seen more proposals, you know, come out of the Department of Education than I don't know what, you know. So, you know, my next letter is going to be about student debt again, and it's in the process. I will say that after I sent that letter, I got like this 5-page letter back from Barack Obama outlining every single step in his new higher ed initiative. I was sitting there in the living room. I got it about a month before it was made public, and I was sitting in the living room reading this letter, page after page, and I looked at Susan and I said, you know what, Susan? I think there's something going on here. I think this is actually something new in this. Yeah, so, yeah, but you know what?
I love the fact you're talking about having a space for doing work, but without having a purpose to it. And how do you teach students here that, is their purpose to go out and get a job, or is their purpose to find the things where they find the stones in their lives?
Yeah.
You do both.
I don't know if I can really answer that question. You know, I guess I would just say, you know, moments of liberation are always to be treasured, but expecting a life of moments of liberation is probably beyond what I can manage, I guess. Anybody else? I really, really thank you for sitting through the whole thing and being such a wonderful audience. Thank you.